What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome to First Time, Long Time. I'm Colin Newby of 97.5 The Fanatic and 93.3 WMMR, coming to you weekly for now with a Philly Sports Talk podcast. There's not much to talk about today, except the wildest weekend I've ever seen live.
And they just keep battling. It's a very resilient club, and you can see the same thing with the Mets. They're not going to quit either. This is shaping up to be a classic battle.
You got the Phillies all tied up 1-1 with the New York Mets. A wild weekend at Citizens Bank Park. The first weekend of that Red October crowd. You had this crazy Game 1 atmosphere on Saturday. The pregame, I saw the decor on the field. All the media attention during batting practice. The tailgates outside. We had John Boog Sciambi and Doug Glanville of ESPN Radio. They broadcasted the game on 97.5 The Fanatic. You had the whole Fox crew there. Then fast forward to the game. You had that Kyle Schwarber home run that rocked Citizens Bank Park, turned up the noise by a million. You had Zach Wheeler pitching a gem, and then you had the agony of defeat crush the city of Philadelphia. After Game 1, everybody was ready to panic. Rob Thompson even was ready to panic. He sat Alec Boehm in Game 2. And for Alec Boehm, I think he's got to have more composure. This is nothing new, but I was still surprised with the move. But Alec Boehm did not react well to struggling in Game 1. It was pretty much the whole offense, by the way, not just Alec Boehm. But he did not control his emotions, and this has been a problem at other points in his career. And at this point, he just has to move on from that. He has to show some better maturity. But ultimately, it's not only about Alec Boehm, it's about the entire clubhouse and the message it sends when Rob Thompson makes such a big decision like that to start Edmundo Sosa, a guy he called an energy player, but who did not have a good game in Game 2. He ends up going back to Alec Boehm anyway to pinch hit. And I just thought the whole thing was a little bit out of character, not something I saw coming from Rob Thompson. The fan base, well, I would have seen that coming. The fan base has been very reactive to this team all season, even though they finished with the second best record in the majors. I did not feel the confidence, the positivity that I might have felt in other seasons back in 2007 to 11 when everybody looked at the Phillies as this powerhouse. I thought the reaction was different the entire season, and you definitely saw that after Game 1. You just had doom and gloom, especially on the 97.5 The Fanatic airwaves, from the callers and from the host. And it was a tough spot. And NLDS is 5 games long. Losing Game 1 of the series is a huge deal, and their World Series odds took a real hit after that Game 1 loss. But then there was Game 2, and that start was even more brutal. The Phillies were just whiffing at junk below the zone for the first 5 innings of that game. If you look at that at-bat from Nick Castellanos in the 4th inning, that's pretty much as bad as it gets. He goes down 0-2 chasing 2 terrible pitches, and then the 3rd pitch of the at-bat he lays off, which it was even worse. It bounced in front of the plate, and the crowd at Citizens Bank Park gives him the Bronx cheer, which in the moment I kind of thought was funny. After that, I'm sure everybody's already seen this on social media. He had some explicit words for the crowd giving him that reaction. At least that's what it appeared like from the lip reading experts. But he got out on the next pitch. He put the ball in play, but he still swung at a pitch out of the zone right after that. And it was just a terrible feeling all the way throughout Citizens Bank Park. It was tense in that building. People talk about the home field advantage in Red October, and yeah, that's true. It is a wild home field advantage. But there's also another side to that. The reason it's so great is because Philadelphia is so passionate. They're absolutely wild about their teams. But the downside being that if you get down in the game, if the opponent scores first, the crowd tenses up because they're so into it. the confidence level drops a lot, and I think that's what you saw, especially in the Sunday game. In Game 2, when they were trailing 3-0 going into the sixth inning, that crowd just did not feel good about what was going on. But ultimately, things turned around like crazy. Bryce Harper sends that 2-run homer in the sixth inning to finally get the Phillies on the board. Castellanos comes up next, hits a home run to tie it, back-to-back homers, and all of a sudden the crowd's reignited. I feel like 100 things happened between that point and the Castellanos walk-off single, but you all saw the game if you're listening to this show. The Phillies end up with a 7-6 victory at Citizens Bank Park. We're going back to Citi Field 1-1. And I think the biggest talking points here, it's something I already touched on, the Phillies' offensive approach. You've heard all year about the chase rate, the plate discipline, so we're going to get into that. Also, the bullpen, that's something nobody really saw coming, was how bad the bullpen actually was in games 1 and 2. And also just the excitement, the atmosphere, the unpredictable nature of playoff baseball. You saw that in full effect this weekend, especially on Sunday. My biggest talking point after this series, though, and I've already touched on it in numerous ways, it's the Phillies' offensive approach. They only put up 2 runs on Saturday, and then they got shut out for the first 5 innings on Sunday. All of a sudden, they explode for 7 runs in 4 innings to get that victory over the Mets. Check out the full story on 975thefanatic.com. It's analyzing the Phillies' chase rate issues during classic NLDS battle. There's a breakdown with stats, some quotes from over the weekend from Trey Turner and Rob Thompson, Kyle Schwarber also, but really about how things came together for the Phillies to even up that series, especially with Bryce Harper and Nick Castellanos, who's the poster boy for this Phillies issue. I'll throw in a quick side note that doesn't define the weekend. People talk so much on Saturday about the shadows, and I don't get why that was a big deal. I really don't think the Phillies use it as an excuse. Trey Turner and Nick Castellanos, they said it after Game 1 in their media availability, but that doesn't mean they were using it as an excuse. They acknowledged a challenge and said they needed to overcome it, and then they were 2 of the guys in Game 2 that really helped lead that comeback, and I just wasn't sure what was wrong with that. A lot of people seem really mad. What's way more impactful than the shadows is the chase rate thing. The Phillies have this tendency to chase pitches below the zone, and it's just the most obvious way to point out this flaw that maddens fans. It has throughout the year, and you can trace it all the way back to the NLCS, the loss against the Diamondbacks. There was also the midsummer slump where the Phillies were struggling after the All-Star break. And then in September, again, this issue kind of reared its ugly head. I honestly don't think this would be nearly as much of a talking point if the NLCS hadn't unfolded the way it did. But the reality is, the Diamondbacks threw 45 strikeouts in their 4 victories in the series last year. In their 3 losses, they only threw 11 strikeouts. So chase rate clearly was an issue for this team in the playoffs last year. They made it an emphasis coming into spring training, but they finished 25th in the majors in chase rate during the regular season. But in diving here and on the article on 975thefanatic.com, I go into how chase rate is a little bit more complex. And one of the biggest reasons I thought about that is something Kyle Schwarber said Sunday morning during his pregame availability before Game 2.
I guess selective, right? Selective is a word selective to where you want to be, besides don't chase. No one's talking in the room saying, don't chase, right? Like, we're talking about where we want to be in the zone.
So you've had these issues with chase rate, and it really impacted them in Game 1. But this is not just swinging at strikes and looking at balls. If you hear what he said, where we want to be in the zone. But what does that mean? And I think you can go back to the obvious example to analyze that question. Think about Nick Castellanos. He's the free swinger. He's the poster boy for all of these issues. Kind of the easy one to pick on, and that's why the crowd gave him that Bronx cheer on Sunday afternoon. So the Phillies did improve after those 5 innings, after some of those brutal at-bats that were frustrating Phillies fans so much. But one thing you got to consider, before Castellanos got the walk-off hit in the bottom of the 9th, he actually chased 2 pitches outside the zone earlier in the same at-bat. I'm going to play a quote from Trey Turner here that gives a little more insight and goes deeper into the issue, and I think you got to piece all of this together to really get a clear picture of this chase rate issue.
I think it's a little bit of everything. Getting that first game under your belt yesterday, I think, helped a little bit. Making adjustments, like you said, we have veteran guys. We know, obviously, when we're doing stuff wrong or things that we do very well, and when we're not doing them, we know that we have to work on different things. So, this time of year is just battling and trying to get those good pitches that I always talk about and not missing them. I saw a homer that Bryce hit was the pitch he had to hit, stuff like that. And, today felt like we got a few more of those pitches and we didn't miss them. And I think that's when the homer starts to come and some of those extra base hits start to come.
So Trey Turner focused on the mistakes that the Mets made there, and he's very accurate if you just look at some of the pitches where the Phillies were getting these big hits in the late innings. The Harper and Castellanos homers were on pitches over the center of the plate. The one there where Trey Turner got the single and ultimately scored on Harper's homer, that pitch was right over the plate. And then a couple others with the big hits in the 8th and 9th inning, Bryson Stott triple especially, those were over the plate. So it really wasn't as straightforward as just better pitch selection, which is obviously a big part of the game, but it's not the whole story. And the Phillies deserve a ton of credit here because things looked really ugly. You had that tense feeling at Citizens Bank Park. If you get down early, it's hard to come back with that pressure on you. They ultimately adjusted and crushed the Mets in the late innings, which they didn't do in Game 1. You had an exhausted pitching staff from the Mets going on this wild run, but the Phillies couldn't take advantage of it. In the late innings of Game 2, they finally did start taking advantage of some of these things, taking the mistakes that the Mets made and making them pay for it. Rob Thompson gave them credit in his post-game availability after Game 2. I forget who asked this question in the media room, but take a listen to the sound clip. Rob, once the offense did start to get it going in the 6th inning, do you think it's due to the guys making some changes, changing their approach, anything like that?
Well, absolutely. I think that, there's been a lot of talk publicly, but in our clubhouse about getting back in the strike zone, controlling the strikes on both sides of the ball. If you do that, you're going to win games. And I think they're making a conscious effort for sure.
So check out that game story wrapping up the weekend at Citizens Bank Park, the first 2 games of the NLDS. Head to 975thefanatic.com and get that. And you also got to look ahead to Game 3. That's coming up after the break.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. Jumping right back into NLDS conversation as the series shifts up to Citi Field in New York. You got Aaron Nola on the mound. Remember, there were a lot of conversations taking place last week about starting Christopher Sanchez in Game 2 at home. That's because he has great home splits. He did throughout the season. But it's also because Aaron Nola goes into a pitcher's park in Citi Field. He's given up a ton of home runs in his career. He gave up 30 this season, and Citi Field is less friendly to home runs than Citizens Bank Park is. And Aaron Nola has the weirdest perception in Philadelphia sports. Head back into the show feed to get some of the analysis I've given over time about Aaron Nola. Talked about him after the Phillies clinched the NL East and just how weird the fans' relationship with this guy is. But this is a big one in Game 3. Going down 2-1 means do or die, and your confidence in Ranger Suarez can't be that high if you're the Phillies. He had a rough second half of the season after that incredible first half. It was the injury, the back spasms, and then when he did come off the IL, things were just too shaky to really go into the postseason with him as one of your top guys. But I think the real question here is something I mentioned in the opening. The Phillies bullpen got absolutely crushed this weekend. 10 runs in 6 innings pitched. And these were the guys you trust. Jeff Hoffman and Matt Strahm got smoked on Saturday in that 8th inning after Zach Wheeler left the game. Orion Kerkering wasn't good either. Going into the playoffs, the chase thing was legitimate. You could have predicted that. It was probably the top concern for most Phillies fans at least. But the bullpen was supposed to be a strength, especially with Hoffman, Strahm, and Kerkering. They all had the best seasons of their major league careers. And you also had Carlos Estevez. He pitched well on Sunday in Game 2. He was actually the only guy to throw a scoreless inning in the series out of the bullpen for the Phillies so far. But Jose Alvarado, and a little bit of a weird note, he hasn't pitched, and they used Jose Ruiz in the 6th inning of Game 2. Thought it was a stretch by Thompson there, but this bullpen is going to need to be in a better rhythm. Expect the hefty lefty to get some work at Citi Field, especially in matchups against Brandon Nimmo, possibly Jesse Winker if he's in the lineup. But we'll see if Alvarado has his command, and we'll see if the guys Strahm, Hoffman, and Kerkering can bounce back. They were a huge part of the team here. It's not often that 2 middle relievers on an MLB team are going to make the All-Star game, but that's what happened with Strahm and Hoffman this year. These guys were lights out in the regular season, but Hoffman has the bad day Saturday. Strahm can't clean up his mess. Then you get Strahm in the save situation Sunday. He blows it on the Vientos homer, and Hoffman did come in and finish that inning, but neither of these guys pitched with the conviction that you have seen at certain points during the regular season. So, like the Phillies made those adjustments at the plate and starting to get to the Mets hitters late in Game 2, the Phillies bullpen needs to make adjustments also. There's a lot of advanced scouting done at this point in the season, well, through the end of the regular season, and now the playoffs are heavily scrutinized. Pretty much every game in the postseason will be. But the Phillies need to make adjustments and fix the things that happened this weekend, because I don't think that the relievers all just had problems simultaneously. The Mets probably have an approach that they're taking that worked for them this weekend, and we'll see how that plays out in Games 3 and 4 up in Citi Field, and a potential Game 5 if necessary at Citizens Bank Park. But ultimately, my biggest takeaway from this weekend, and this was absolutely chaotic, a complete whirlwind of emotions for me personally on Saturday and Sunday. I was down at the ballpark 10 plus hours both days. Playoff baseball really is unpredictable. This is a ridiculous series. It's an NL East rivalry, and you've already seen that go crazy in the first 2 games. A lot of these talking points and all the analysis kind of goes out the window once the regular season ends. You really need a complete effort from all facets of the game, and any other cliche that you want to throw in there, you just go ahead and do it. We've got another whirlwind continuing up at Citi Field on Tuesday and Wednesday. You're going to get the ESPN radio calls on 97.5 The Fanatic. I know people love local announcers, but I love Boog Sciambi and Doug Glanville. And Glanville, of course, the former center fielder for the Phillies. They did a great job yesterday. I'd encourage everybody to give it a try on the ESPN radio simulcast on the Fanatic. But possibly even a Game 5 at Citizens Bank Park on Friday night. And if you want intensity, my God, that would be absolutely wild if we do end up with a split at Citi Field on Tuesday and Wednesday. Throughout the rest of the playoffs, however long they last, I'll be adding episodes as often as I can, going a little bit more than the usual once-a-week schedule, but that remains to be seen as this series goes along and as the MLB postseason goes along. I'm Colin Newby, and this has been First Time, Long Time. I'll talk to you, Philadelphia.